Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Cyber Risk Reporting to the Board, a step-by-step playbook. My name is Ethan Bresnahan. I'm the marketing director here at CyberSaint. Today, I'm excited to welcome CyberSaint founder and newly appointed Chief Innovation Officer, Padraic O'Reilly, and John Wheeler, founder and CEO of Wheelhouse Advisors. We're so glad that you can join us. As always, feel free to submit questions throughout the presentation. And with that, I will hand things off to Padraic.
Thank you, Ethan. Yeah, it's a real pleasure today to be sharing this webinar with John Wheeler. His expertise in this area is well known, and his thoughts on some of the recent developments with respect to the SEC and their rulemaking, and even some of the civil cases that have come out of these rules will, I think, be interesting to anyone who works in risk management and maybe in cyber risk management as well, information security more generally. So we've put together a small presentation to provide a little bit of context around the topic, and I'll hand it to John to jump in, and we'll be discussing this back and forth in a free-flowing manner.
Great. Well, thanks, Patty. And I think before getting started, I'm just going to give you a brief introduction, a little bit about my professional background, give you a little bit of understanding where I'm coming from on the topic. So I am founder, CEO of Wheelhouse Advisors. We specialize in offering strategy and technology advice to folks like CyberSaint, technology providers, but also end users of those technologies, specifically in the integrated risk management marketplace. My professional background spans over 33 years now and divided into really three different kind of segments, if you will. First part was focused on IT and finance. I was an IT consultant, also a financial executive in the healthcare space, serving as head of finance for a large academic medical center and healthcare system. Second half is really where I started to get into what my expertise is all about, risk management, in leading internal audit, compliance, operational and enterprise risk management programs for a leading financial institution in the US. Also, during that time, I got sucked into the Sarbanes-Oxley vortex. While I was leading an internal audit, our organization had the dubious distinction of disclosing the very first material weakness in internal control right out of the gate when Sarbanes-Oxley was enacted. So I was thrown into the firestorm. The board of directors asked me to step out of my internal audit role and remediate our material weakness, and at the same time rebuild our program for SOX compliance. And it involved a full-blown SEC investigation, as well as high-level terminations of several executives. So I've seen a whole lot and certainly understand how the SEC operates, both in a rule-making fashion, but also in an enforcement fashion. The third part of my career is somewhat unique. It's when I started to get into the market of integrated risk management. I served as the lead analyst for IRM at Gartner, which is one of the top research and advisory groups globally. And during that 10 years, I had opportunity not only to research the need of end users, and really with a heavy focus on chief information security officers, on using technology to understand their own businesses much more and be in a better position to really respond to the growing threats that over the last decade we faced, but we're entering a whole new era now, which I call the digital era, and digital risk is pervasive, which I can talk about a little bit more. So in those 10 years, got a lot of great insight, both from end users like CISOs, but all the way up to the board and CEOs, doing survey work with them, and then also technology providers. So that's where I'm coming from. I've got a lot of scars that I've received during my time, and I will share maybe some more stories here. But to begin, I wanted to focus on what I see as, let me get this going here. Yeah, here we go. What I see as a very crucial event that is on the calendar. And in fact, in just over 3 weeks' time, I'm sure many of you on the call know about this, but the SEC has put forth a set of new disclosure rules around cybersecurity risk management that will become effective as of 12/15. So again, in just over 3 weeks' time. And these rules, when I was talking with Patty and the others at CyberStrong about this webinar, and the topic on cyber risk reporting to the board and how do you put together a step-by-step playbook, I thought to myself, what the SEC has put forward is the playbook. And so it couldn't be more clear to organizations, public organizations, certainly, because they are the ones that are going to have to comply specifically with these new rules. But also, these new rules have a broader effect, expanding into the world of third parties and suppliers, partners, others that are a part of the value chain into these public companies. Whether they're public or private, they're also going to be impacted by these rules. And so I think everyone can take away from this some great lessons and opportunities to improve their own programs. And for those of you who know about these rules, or maybe even have ventured into the Federal Register to read what the SEC published, you will find that it's very dense and difficult to interpret. So what I have done on this single slide here is boil it down to the nitty-gritty, what you need to know and focus on. And it really breaks down into these two sides of the slide. On the left-hand side, we're talking about risk management disclosure requirements. And these are items that are going to be disclosed as part of organizations' annual report. So on an annual basis. And as I mentioned before, 12/15 is the date. So any public company with an annual report fiscal year ending on or after 12/15 will have to provide this information within item 106, item 106 within, or according to regulation SK, which is specifically pointing to the 10K filing. And in it, there are two main items. And it really aligns with my view on how organizations need to approach cybersecurity risk management, and especially as a part of an integrated risk management approach and program. And it starts with understanding the processes and the framework that the organization is relying upon to determine whether or not a risk to the organization is material. So organizations will have to fully describe how they assess, how they identify, how they manage those material risks once they are determined material to the organization, and including those, or including not only the third-party involvement in providing that information, but also the risks emanating from third-party providers. So there's two third-party elements here. So you got to focus on integrating the processes into your broader risk management system. That's what the SEC is looking for. They don't necessarily want to see organizations who may have a very fragmented approach or siloed approach to cybersecurity. And the reason why is that comes down to not understanding the cybersecurity impacts to the financial or business operations. And that's where materiality lies in their view, because in their role as a regulatory agency, they are serving the needs of investors. And it's investors that need this information on material risks so that they can make well-informed decisions on whether or not they should be investing in a particular company. And so having that description be very well thought out, but also very well informed by what you are actually doing is critical, because as these incidents, well, I'm going to get to in a moment, start to pop up, and the SEC perhaps may come in to perform some either examinations or investigations on their own. If there's any misalignment, that's where problems can be had. The second piece beyond just integration is making sure that management understands the risks that are emanating from those third-party providers. And I mentioned earlier how this decade really is the new digital era of digital risk. It's primarily because of the use of, or the greater use of, third-party providers in developing new digital products and services. Most of these products and services, whether it be automated vehicles or autonomous vehicles, rather, driverless vehicles, or things like in the healthcare space, telemedicine, these new products and services have so many digital components that may be provided or serviced by a multitude of third parties, that having a very robust capability to monitor those risks and, more importantly, quantify those risks is going to be so important to determining this level of materiality. And then the number two item here really gets into more of the framework piece and how you put together a structure that incorporates the board's duty, fiduciary duty, to oversee risk and have management clearly communicate the assessment and the managing of these material cybersecurity risks to the board on a continuous basis. And what the SEC is looking for here is who's involved in that process on the management side, including any committees that may be responsible for this reporting to the board. So it's really important to clearly identify who is reporting into the board, how it's being done, not only for the SEC, but for the board itself in performing their fiduciary duty, but also just for effective risk management. It solidifies accountability and ownership of the risks where they reside. And many of these risks, as a CISO will tell you, or any other security professional, the ownership resides within the business itself. And more as these new products and services in the digital realm are being created, a lot of the decisions around these risks and how they're treated are on the front line. So that's huge. Next piece, and I want to give its full course here, but be very quick about it. This is really where the rubber hits the road. And so what we are looking at is a whole new avenue for providing information on cybersecurity incidents. And the SEC, beginning 12/18, so 12/15, which is a Friday, by the way, is the date for the first column that I described. The right-hand side, these incident requirements hit on the Monday, 12/18, which happens to be my wedding anniversary for those of you interested. But what I'll tell you is these incidents actually are already being reported by companies in the form that the SEC would like. Several examples: the recent hacks or ransomware incidents in the gaming industry at MGM and Caesars. led to filings by those companies. Also, the recent Clorox hack that brought their organization and entire operation to its knees. It's out there within an SEC filing, and it's all within the Form 8K. These 8Ks are filings that are made throughout the year. And what the SEC is looking for is the ability for companies to describe the incident in terms of nature, scope, and timing, but also provide more information on the material impact on financial condition or results of operations. Again, the materiality piece. And the kicker is this all has to be done, or the filing has to be done within 4 business days of determining whether or not that incident is material. So the SEC does give organizations time to determine that materiality, but the clock starts ticking once that decision has been made. And I can tell you from experience, having been through SEC investigations in the past, making sure that that's well documented and how that decision was determined is going to be key for organizations should it lead to either examination or investigation of some sort. And then finally, ongoing throughout the year, and this came through, I think, the commentary that the SEC sought as they were putting together this final ruling, is that organizations will undoubtedly find additional information about a cybersecurity event as they move forward in time. And so the SEC wants companies to provide that information as it becomes available within an amended 8K form. And again, the time frame is similar, 4 business days after the new information is determined or becomes available related to that material event. All right, so that's my summary of the new rules. I'm going to turn it back to Patty briefly, kind of get his viewpoint and see if I can answer any of your questions.
Yeah. My view on this is that, it's been coming for some time. We in CyberSaint, we have been watching it closely as Gensler and his team were talking about it. In our space more generally, we know that the effects of Sarbanes-Oxley were pretty clear on shaping governance, risk, and compliance as a category for software and for services. And we had more than a hunch, it was really just an analysis, that cybersecurity risk management was going to become a set of rules for the regulators. And the effects of it, I think a lot of companies, the ones we work with, have known that this is coming. So it does inform what they are looking for in solutions, in additional help. And it's even in the rules themselves that, third parties, you would disclose what you're doing with third parties when it comes to cyber risk management. I do think, I have a background in economics as well. So I tend to look at this, and Gensler is an economist. I tend to look at this a little bit from the perspective of, protecting shareholder value. I don't think often in cyber, and this is just from having worked in cyber for a decade now, we often talk about the equity side of things, the business side of things, but that's been a big fixation in our company for quite some time. That your practice of cyber as a publicly traded company or a third party that has to deal with flow down impacts equity. And I think that the SEC and its rulemaking has been pretty savvy about pointing up some of the relations that have existed inside companies with respect to how the information flows. I think for me, one of the really interesting parts of this is that in their recent civil action against SolarWinds, you could see their thinking a little bit on, how information should flow in an ideal state. I'm about, market efficiency, and if there are incentives for information to be hidden or to not be, thoroughly vetted, if the passing of information doesn't work inside the organizational structure, you are going to get inefficient outcomes. Those outcomes are for investors, they're for the corporations themselves, but they're also for the economy writ large and how resources flow. So I tend to view this as cyber's growing up in a sense. It's now out in the open that cyber risk management has a financial component, and it has to be paid attention to, and it has to be understood. So the impact of the practice of cyber has to be understood in terms of the legal and the financial implications of it. The practice of cyber, when I walked in, is it's driven by these wonderful products and these unique frameworks, and it can be a little hermetic. It can be a little right. I mean, it can be a little monkish. It's almost a secretive practice, right?
Yeah, like a dark art.
A dark art, yeah. And a lot of the folks we work with and around, are magicians in a sense, and that's okay. That part of cyber isn't going away. The brilliant minds that have come up with the attack framework, or TTP mappings to controls, or the AI that informs the threat-based approach in the SOC, that stuff's not going away. Right. All of the brilliant developments in cyber are not going away. What the SEC is asking cyber to do, in a sense, though, I think is grow up a little bit and learn how to talk about yourself as a part of the business. And that time, might be even overdue in a sense. So I don't know, John, what you think about some of that, but that's how I see it at the moment.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. And in fact, to simplify things, my time at Gartner, when I was working on understanding the needs of end users, but also senior executives and board members around cybersecurity, it became clear, as you said, that there were some missing links in their understanding. And it really boiled down to understanding how a technology asset and the threats and vulnerabilities within that technology asset enabled a given business process. So which assets are driving which part of the business? Right. And then, to your point, exactly what outcome are you looking to generate from those processes? And that simple integration, that link between assets, processes, and outcomes is what the SEC is looking for, what the board members are looking for, it's what senior executives are looking for. And it's what is lacking in a lot of programs because they simply don't have the visibility or understanding into how all this connects together. And I think one of the things I left out of my discussion around this new incident disclosure timing and requirement is the need for solid metrics around what impacts are being had by these threats and vulnerabilities or a given attack on a process and ultimately the outcome. Those metrics need to be in place so you can quickly determine whether it's material. But the only way to do that is through technology, is to have something like a CyberSaint and CyberStrong platform to provide that visibility and understanding that just a lot of organizations lack. And just one additional caveat here, not only do they lack it in large enterprises, it's especially challenging for small and medium-sized public companies who don't have the resource. And so they're looking for ways through technology to get this information.
Yeah, absolutely. And, when we work with larger organizations, one of our stated, missions inside our company is to democratize cyber risk management. So I'm very hopeful that the less mature organizations out there will benefit from some of the groundbreaking work that the large enterprises are doing with respect to cyber risk management. So,
yes.
So we're shifting slides here, and the board is demanding more, and we've seen this before. So, I was down in Alpharetta recently around those data centers, visiting with some companies we work with, and we were sitting together in a room, and they were all reading the SolarWinds civil case, and they were like, they were excited about it. They were like, it reads like a detective novel. It speaks in our language, in information security, about some things that may or may not, because this is, going to go to trial. It may or may not have happened, but in any event, we recognize all the components that are inside that document. So, it'd be great to talk to you a little bit about what the implications are for the board with respect to the practice of information security. If the information, is flowing through the CISO, what it will mean for the chief financial officer, what it will mean for the C-suite, what it means for the board. What do they need to know? Because I think there's a lot of confusion about this. When you read in the press, you often read a couple of lawyers weigh in at the end of an article. I saw one in the New York Times recently, and they were saying things, to the effect that, well, the SEC really hasn't been clear about, disclosing vulnerabilities. And I was shocked at that statement, because that nowhere in what the SEC has written do they say they want you to disclose individual vulnerabilities.
Right.
But there's still a great deal of confusion about this, and maybe you can speak a little bit, on a high level as to where things can go wrong, where cyber risk management historically lives. It varies, and what is the role for governance? What has it been, and how is that changing a little bit?
Yeah, and I think SolarWinds is a great case study, and I'm sure this factored into the SEC's decision to file this charge against them and go after them. On the literally the doorstep of rolling out these new rules, they wanted to send a clear message, in my opinion, that in these new filings, folks are going to have to be, a lot more specific,
Mhm.
and, relay the unique risks to their organization. And again, it's focusing on risk and risk to the business itself, as you mentioned before, but how it originates or emanates in the cyber realm. And what the SEC, in my experience in working with them, really despises, and it's something that you have in the next bullet point, is any sort of highly boilerplate language that is so generic
Yeah.
that it can't be applied to that unique environment.
Right.
And you say here, we've seen something similar to the SOX regulation, and going back in time for me, it's exactly what the SEC worked through in not only helping organizations better disclose these, whether it is a material weakness or significant deficiency in their controls, or even, the potential risks, that they do so with an eye towards that investor. And
Right.
so, where things can go wrong, where cyber risk management lives, and it all really focuses in on what's known as the disclosure controls and procedures,
Mhm.
which really was generated out of Sarbanes-Oxley. And it's what the SEC will just drill into. And when I bring this up, the question I always get, in addition to what are disclosure controls and procedures, is, how do they relate to the larger control portfolio that organizations rely upon.
Right.
The disclosure controls and procedures really are the last mile of providing information through the reporting process or through these SEC filings. And they really focus in on the legal side of the equation, whether or not information that is being disclosed is being done so in accordance with laws and rules, regulatory agency rules like the SEC's, but also that the key leaders and personnel are involved in reviewing and agreeing to what is going to be reported. So it gets back to the initial requirement for SEC wants to know what committees are reviewing this information. How does that report into the board? How often does the board look at this information? Who is involved in that process? Those are all the disclosure controls and procedures that within SOX, CEO and CFO rely upon in making their certification under the Sarbanes-Oxley Act.
Right.
And that's going to, send them to jail if it's inaccurate or fraudulent in any way. While the cybersecurity rules don't have that kind of legal focus, what I will say is the controls around cybersecurity do tie back into SOX through IT general controls and can also rise up to a SOX issue. So all of this is interrelated.
Mm-hmm.
And again, just expresses the need for an integrated approach to managing these risks. And it's why the SEC specifically says, describe how cyber risk is integrated into the broader risk management process. It's because of this SOX piece.
Right. Yeah, and I think you really hit on it there with the disclosure rules and procedures, because that's about where the information goes, who sees it, who touches it, who's responsible for it. That's the fiduciary component. Because for so long in cyber, I think we've discussed governance in the context of, is there an incentive to maybe not want to know certain things, right? And then is there an incentive to maybe hide other things? And insofar as those incentives exist, you might be sort of inadvertently creating a situation in which organizational behavior isn't optimal, right? Around the sharing of information. And, if it's not optimal around the sharing of information, you're going to get, again, inefficient outcomes. And I think this is really about understanding cyber in the broader context of how, our system works.
Yes.
And And I mean, it's a great moment in cyber risk management for that reason. It's, you could say it, to keep it really simple, you could say cyber risk management is growing up. It's having to join, the rest of the ranks on the governance side now. And I've read plenty of boilerplate risk disclosure, because you can go on Edgar, right? And you can just drop in a name, right? And if you're up for it, you can read boilerplate, and it's like dime store cyber. It's really, it's just like reading pulp cyber fiction. It's like, there may be a case in which our controls could be theoretically inadequate to defend against, a particular attack, and we may suffer material consequences as a result. And it's like, well, yeah, I mean, but a couple of paragraphs to that effect doesn't describe how you view risk. And I think sometimes too, because we have an actuarial data set in system, which if you just query it, it'll tell you what risk looks like along 34 dimensions with respect to each sector and company size, right? So you can sort of exogenously project that onto the companies and sort of weigh their boilerplate and be like, well, they're sort of missing the point. Any investor would know, a really well-informed investor would know what some of their exposures are, and to have them sort of, tiptoeing around possible exposures, theoretical exposures. The SEC, I think, is, substantively trying to put an end to that. And it raises the question too, if you are revealing, some aspect of your risk management program, and there may be gaps in it, is that some sort of clarion call to hackers? No. In fact, if you are able, and here's another thing that, I've been amazed at, and I don't know what your thoughts are, but I've been amazed at this idea that if we get into describing cyber risk management as we practice it, we will be signaling to the bad guys that they should come after us in some of these ways. They already know, the bad guys already know what, by sector, what some of the primary, exposures are. They already know that stuff. That's not new information, really. But there's also this other missing the point thing I've seen in the press, which is, if we describe our practices, we will be, exposing ourselves in certain ways, rather than if we describe our practices well, we will be differentiating ourselves from our competitors, right? Because the analysts are going to pore over this stuff, and we will be adding equity. Then, why do you think, John? Why don't you hear more companies talking about this as an opportunity to see cyber as a business driver?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. And I think we've gone far too long with that argument of, disclosing this information is just going to add to the weakness of the organization. The organizations that are doing the right things and managing the risks in the right way and disclosing that are going to be the ones that are rewarded, not only through their performance, because they will have fewer incidents, but also through the value of within the investor community, shareholders. They're going to value that strength in ways that I think companies don't necessarily recognize. I think we're going to find out a lot next year as more and more companies are disclosing and disclosing more accurately. That value, the differentiation, will become much clearer to everyone involved. And so the value, the delta in value will also become much more pronounced. And so I think this is going to have a virtuous cycle, if you will. More disclosure leads to and so forth. The other thing I think is, and this is kind of a caution coming from what SEC is looking at with SolarWinds, it's so important that what you do disclose, that matches up with what you're actually doing and managing from a risk perspective. And so, it's imperative not only that you look to strengthen your program to be able to disclose that in an opportunistic way, from a capitalist view, right. But internally, if you're doing something different and it's not in alignment with what you're disclosing, the SEC is not going to tolerate that. And I think as we get into additional disclosure here, the market itself will not tolerate that, because right. It will become evident not only through these new disclosures, but through other means. And, I think a transparency and disclosure in the end is a great thing. It is a great thing for open markets. And I really do hope that the SEC, is successful in pushing that forward.
Yeah, I agree with you wholeheartedly. I mean, it's just basic economic theory.
Yeah.
If you have informational asymmetries, things tend to break. So this slide, here we sort of put in some of the view into our product, CyberStrong, and just want to talk a little bit briefly about what, how we maybe anticipated some of what was coming via the SEC. And also really, this has grown out of our client base as well. So this is just the executive dashboard on the left. And then on the right, just quick screenshot of what we call risk remediation workflow. So on the left, really what we're doing is, and we talked to a lot of companies about this, at CISOs, board members, our advisory board in depth. The basic idea is, what is a cyber risk management program? How do you talk about it? How do you use benchmarking? How do you do it quickly? If you haven't, if you're trying to mature into it, how do you at least put the structure into place to get some top-down view from risk itself, cyber risk itself, and then into the operational layers where you might have controls and processes and IT as well. Even, strategic initiatives that involve, migrating to the cloud, et cetera. But the basic context here is from the top level. And, in our company over the last maybe 2 or 3 months, we've been very focused on this idea of top-down risk because we have certain components in system that allow companies to come in and immediately benchmark themselves by their sector, by their revenue, by their company size, employee count, what their top exposures are. What are the top 15 vectors that you and your competitors, are facing in this particular environment? And how do those change over time? So quick time to value is a thing in software. A lot of, as you know from GRC, John, GRC platforms got big. They got big and they got very configurable. And it's not the easiest thing for companies necessarily to put a GRC system into place because they're so powerful. And you can begin to build them out, but it can take a long time. When it comes to cyber risk, everything is moving so quickly. We're relatively young startups still. Our focus has been on, quick time to value, top-down risk, allow you to benchmark yourself on risk immediately, then begin associating some of the practices and some of the configurations, you need to do. And then maybe control automation comes along a little bit later, which can take a little bit more time. But it's been our focus to help companies understand cyber risk management writ large initially, and to get immediate value on that, at least as a way to begin thinking through how you can put programs into place, how you can break down certain silos, how you can encourage the ownership of information security across many functions. And that includes some of the things you were alluding to earlier, John, which are, the silos in information risk and how you get buy-in across the organization and understanding the structure of the company or the business. So understanding what are the crown jewels, what are the processes, right? What are the machines, the sites, all of the things that create value and how cyber relates to the creation of that value. It's a big intellectual challenge in some ways, but you can start simply and build from there. So I just wanted to share a little bit around how we think about top-down risk. Now we'll transition into some of the great work you did around GRC and the consequences of GRC getting rather large and how that shaped the market and really kind of created the moment we're in too, to some extent.
Yeah, and I know we're running up on time a little bit, so I'll be brief here. But yeah, you rightly said that the GRC challenge became that these platforms became very large, unwieldy, difficult to maintain, and specifically at the pace of change within the organization. And in my research, I found that there are 4 key risk objectives, and these are integrated risk management risk objectives that include GRC, by the way. The way I've defined the market, it's GRC in addition to IT risk, operational risk, and enterprise risk coming together. But these 4 risk objectives, every single organization, no matter industry, size, location, they all have to solve for these 4 objectives. And my, I guess, party message to the group would be And I'd be more than happy to talk to anyone afterwards on these items. But performance, resilience, assurance, and compliance, PRAC, this is the practical approach that business leaders need. And so when you're looking to present to the board, you need to keep these risk objectives in mind in this order, because this is their priority order and what board members need to know. They've got to understand the operational impacts that are driving their performance forward. They've also, once they know that, do they need to act on something if it's a negative impact? That will be obvious. The resilience piece, they need to have some understanding and look to management for rapid response and recovery when these incidents occur, including the disclosure. Also, they've got their assurance duty and making sure that whatever they are reporting, that it's complete and accurate. Got to have that. And, really, technology is a big part of that, and pulling that data together and ensuring through effective controls that it is complete and accurate. And then finally, compliance should be the fourth priority. Not saying that it's not important, but it really is a natural outcome of addressing the first three objectives. And with specific focus here from cybersecurity perspective on making sure that the key stakeholders are involved in that incident reporting process. So certainly folks within legal, finance, HR, also within the lines of business themselves, and then the experts within risk and security and compliance all have to come together and put forth, their view on an incident in a very quick fashion. So I'll leave it at that, and then turn it back to Patty and see if there's anything else you'd like to cover.
No, I think that's a great way to end it. I would just, reiterate that one of the reasons I've been so taken up with what the SEC has done is that they're quite explicitly stating that they are relating cybersecurity to the overall business. And that has been a preoccupation of mine and of the companies for quite some time, understanding how you can buy down risk, understanding how you can plan your cyber remediations or your cyber projects and relate them to risk and produce more efficient outcomes for the business. Not only do that, create equity for the business. And I think it's a real watershed moment across the board for cyber and for risk management more generally, because in truth, cyber does create value. It can also create exposures that can lead to a loss of value. But having it more out in the open, in the sunlight, and having the information flows be more efficient and having the responsibilities better understood, I think is a wonderful time for the practice of cyber. And John, I would just thank you, for your expertise and your clarity. It's been fascinating to listen to you and get to chat, and I always enjoy it.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. And there is one question here, and I think you can knock this one out of the park rather quickly. Incidents that are determined to be material. So what does the SEC mean by material, John?
Yeah, great question. One that I have been challenged with going all the way back to my days with Sarbanes-Oxley. What I will point you to is something known as SAB, S-A-B 99. It's Staff Accounting Bulletin 99 that the SEC put out back in 1999, hence the 99. It will give you exactly what they're looking for and how they define materiality. There's also another recent article from their chief accountant, and I have a blog post at wheelhouseadvisors.com in our risk tech journal. And so if you go there, you can look at my views on his discussion on materiality and SAB 99.
Fantastic. That's a perfect answer. A lawyer couldn't have done it any better. So
I don't know whether that's a compliment or not, but I'll take it as one.
Well, like all things, it has a lot of different meanings. But that
Yeah.
I'm going to go look at SAB 99 now. Again, thank you everyone for joining. I just reshared the last slide because Chuck English asked me to. Perhaps you can screenshot it. The slides will be available as well. Again, John, a real pleasure. Thanks for joining today, and thanks to our guests as well. And I'm sure there'll be more to come on this.
Take care. Thank you.
Take care, John. Bye now.